Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be doing a review and walkthrough of this game here, Memoir 44 by Days of Wonder. Memoir 44 is a game for 2 to 8 players, and it is a miniatures tabletop wargame board game, which sounds like a mouthful, but it's basically just a way of saying you're going to be controlling miniature tanks, infantry soldiers, and artillery on a board that contains a hex grid, and that hex grid is going to represent the terrain and layout of the battlefield that you and your opponent will be fighting on. The game basically represents, pretty historically I might add, several of the battles that took place at the beginning of World War II between the Axis and the Allies. I want to say there are 16 different scenarios, each historically depicting one of the more famous battles that took place during that period of time. All of the battles, or all of the scenarios I should say, have unique setups for both sides, which means you're not going to just have the same number of infantry and artillery and armor going against each other. Not only do you have a unique sort of layout of what you're going to bring, its starting position on the battlefield is going to be historically accurate to the battle that you're trying to sort of recreate, as is the terrain and the various terrain features that you're going to place, whether it be sandbag walls or tank traps, bridges, towns, anything that was sort of there in real life. The game does a pretty good job of representing in these miniaturized battles. I say miniaturized because this is a very fast, easy to learn, and easy to play game, while at the same time maintaining a feel of tactical supremacy. Like, you're actually making some solid decisions and you're trying to work through your turn and your battle plan going forward through the game. But at the same time, the whole game, from opening the box to closing the box, takes about an hour or less. It's extremely well designed and a whole lot of fun to play. It's actually so much fun that you don't realize you're learning while you're playing the game. You can actually get quite a bit of information from the brief descriptions of the battles while you're setting up the scenario for that particular game. It tells you who the leaders were on either side, what they were fighting over, were they trying to take territory, were they trying to secure a strategic location, at what point in the war did this take place, and what battles to come did it set up. How did it help sort of tilt the scales in the direction of the Allies? So it's a really, really well-designed game in pretty much every aspect. I played this game a couple of times. I played it with my wife because I knew she wasn't the type of person who was by default going to like this type of game. Not necessarily a huge history buff, not really into World War II. Played a few miniature games, but nothing sort of this historically accurate. And she liked the game just as much as I did because it was easy to pick up and easy to dive into, and it immediately immersed you into the sort of stories that it was trying to tell, with the way that the scenarios are set up, the way that they replicate the actual battle, and the way that you're making these sort of snap tactical decisions with your command cards while you play through the game. Let me get into what comes with the game. So in the box, you're going to have your core rulebook here, I should say your main rulebook here. This contains all of the rules and 16 different scenarios. Those scenarios can be played with one-on-one setup or as teams. The game plays for 2 to 8 players, so you could technically have 2 teams of 4 playing against each other. There's actually the 16th scenario is Operation Overlord, I believe, which you can put 2 boards side by side and sort of storm the Omaha beaches or something like that. So that's pretty intense. The rulebook itself is actually only about half rules, and of that, I would say half of that is diagrams, so it's very straightforward to get through. The whole second half of the book is appendixes to make life easier for researching or for searching for things real quickly, and the actual scenarios themselves. Then you've got the game board. The game board is a double-sided hex board. One side is a beachfront, and the other side is sort of just an open, grassy area, and those are used to represent the different battles that you're going to fight. You've got the different terrain tiles. The terrain tiles cover everything from forests to hedgerows to rivers and streams, hilltops, cities and villages, pretty much everything that you might come across on a battlefield. Then there are the actual models themselves. You've got infantry units, which are sort of represented as these 4 infantrymen. You've got armor units, which are represented by 3 separate tanks. And then you've got artillery, which is represented by 2 artillery cannons. Beyond the actual fighting models, you've also got barbed wire walls, you've got sandbag defenses, and you've got tank traps. You've also got these sort of long, skinny pieces here, and these are actually card holders, so that instead of holding your cards in your hand, you can have them laid out in front of you, sort of like Scrabble tiles, which is a really fun feature. I like it. You've got the command cards themselves. These are how you're going to be making your tactical moves during your turn. You're not just going to decide, oh, I choose that unit and I move it over there, or I choose this unit and they attack. Instead, you're going to use these command cards. Command cards determine in what section of the battlefield, either the left flank, the center, or the right flank, you're going to actually activate units in. It also tells you how many units you're going to activate, and whether or not you're going to be able to take any special actions. Some command cards are entirely special actions. For example, there's one called Counterattack, where you pretty much just replicate the command card that your opponent just used. So if your opponent plays some awesome card that lets them move 4 or 5 different units and pull off all these crazy maneuvers, you then get to immediately replicate all of those actions, which is nice. Other cards are as simple as Attack by, and that lets you activate 3 units or order 3 units in the center of the board. All of the cards are really nicely laid out, so you can sort of get what they do at a glance. You don't have to read 3 paragraphs of text and understand these complex, intricate rules to figure out what's going on. It's really as simple as activate units in this area, and then you go, or order units in that area, I should say, and then you go do what you want to do with those units. Moving on to the dice. The dice for this game are 6-sided die, but they are unique. They don't have regular pips on them. They have 6 different symbols. So you've got a green star, a black tank, a purple flag, an orange grenade, a blue infantryman, and a second blue infantryman. Each of those has a unique meaning for while you're doing battle in the game. So getting into how the game is played and starting with setup, you're basically going to flip the scenario page that you want to play, and that's going to tell you what you need to put on the board for terrain. That's going to tell you where to place the terrain. That's going to show you what units each side starts with and where they start. It's going to show you any additional terrain features such as sandbag walls or barbed wire fences that you're going to place onto the board. It's going to give you any special win conditions that you're going to be fighting over. Normally in the game, whenever you wipe out an entire unit, the last model of that unit gets placed onto your side of the board, onto this sort of medal row, and the scenario will tell you how many medals each side needs to win. But in some games, there are special ways to earn additional medals to get to that win point faster, such as taking strategic locations or overrunning certain defenses that have been set up on the board. Once you've got the board set up, and like I said, that takes about 10 to 15 minutes if both players sort of jump in, and you've got all of your units laid on the board, it's time to start the game. And the scenario will also tell you which player goes first and how many command cards each player starts with. There are also sometimes sort of special, unique features to set up that make the game feel even more sort of immersive. For example, I played one game with my wife where she was playing the Allied forces, and they sort of had this last-minute airdrop that dropped a bunch of models onto the field. And to do that, she actually picked up 4 infantry models, held them over the board, and dropped them. And according to the rules, any model that didn't land on a terrain space that already included a unit, or a terrain space that had, or fell off the board is what it was. Any model that landed on basically an open terrain space turned into a full unit of infantry. And she actually had all 4 infantry models land on open spaces, so she gained a total of 16 additional models, 4 units of 4. That's pretty awesome, and again, really immersive. Like, it's cool that they figured out a way to replicate sort of an airdrop gone wrong with these additional infantry units just landing in random locations. So once you've got the game set up, whichever player is going to be going first looks at their starting command cards and decides which cards they want to play. So say, for example, they play this card here, Attack. Issue an order to 3 units in the center, and at the bottom there it shows 3 in the center. Order 3 units. Pretty straightforward. You're going to pick 3 units anywhere in the center, and you can see the center is the area between these 2 red dashed lines. These lines actually show you which is the left flank, which is the right flank, and which is the center. If you have a model or a unit on a hex that is on the red line, so it's technically in both, that's exactly how it works. It's technically in both. So if they're, for example, halfway between the center and the right, if you play a card that targets models in the or units in the center, it can target them. And if you play a card that targets models on the right flank, you can target them. So it's pretty intuitive. So order 3 units in the center. When you give orders, you're basically choosing units to activate. Once a unit has been given an order, it can do 1 or 2 things. Or it can do no things, although I'm not sure why you'd want to do that. It can move and it can attack. Depending on how it moves, it may forfeit its ability to attack. So for example, infantry units can move 0 to 2 spaces. So you can move no spaces, you can move 1 space, or you can move 2 spaces. However, if you move 2 spaces, you can not then attack. So it's basically almost like issuing a run or a charge order. Basically, you're trying to cover more ground, and because of that, you're not going to take an attack action, which happens during the battle phase, which is the next phase. So you issue your orders, or you choose which units you want to issue your orders to in the correct locations of the board. Then you move on to your move step. You move each of them that you want to move up to their available move distance. Every unit type moves a different distance, so infantry moves different than tanks, which moves different than artillery. I believe tanks can move up to 3 and still attack. Artillery can only move, I want to say 1 or 2, and if they move at all, they can't attack. And infantry moves 0 to 2. So once you've moved, you move into the battle phase, or the battle step. Anything that has the ability to do battle or attack now can. So the way that you attack is you basically shoot a number of hexes based off of the infantry, or I should say based off the unit that you're attacking with. So infantry shoots up to 3 hexes. However, the amount of damage that they do, or the number of die they roll, I should say, reduces based off how far away you're shooting. So if you're shooting into an adjacent hex, you're going to roll 3 die. If you're shooting one further than the adjacent hex, you're going to shoot 2 die. And if you're shooting one further from that, you're only going to roll 1 die. Beyond that, they can't make attacks. You also have to factor in line of sight. This is a miniatures game, which means there is going to be some line of sight. If you haven't played a miniatures game before, line of sight is basically, can this unit see that unit? Although because this is on a hex, it is pretty simplified. Basically, you can't see through most types of terrain that you would think would block line of sight. So you can't see through a forest. You can't see through a town. You can't see through a hill. Seeing into is different than seeing through. You can see into a forest. So if there is an enemy unit in the forest, on that hex that has the forest, you can see them. However, if you're on one side of the forest and they're on the other side of the forest, you can't see through the forest. You can see into it, not through it. Same with cities, same with hills. So when you decide to make your attack, you choose the unit that you're attacking with. It has to be one of the units that you already gave an order. And then you choose a unit that they're going to shoot at. That unit has to be within their range and they have to have line of sight to it. As long as that's true, you roll a number of dice based off of how far away that unit is. And then you're going to sort of compare symbols you rolled to the type of unit that you're shooting at. So if you're shooting an infantry, if you roll the infantry symbol or you roll the grenade symbol, each symbol of that type rolled removes one of those infantry models. If you remove the final infantry model of that unit, you place it on your board as a medal. That's sort of 1 victory point towards your total number of victory points needed to win the game. Same is true of an armor unit. If you were to wipe out the final tank of an armor unit, you place that onto your medal grid or your medal row, and that is a victory point towards your final number needed. The infantry need infantry symbols and grenades. The armored units, when you're firing at them, you'd need to roll a grenade or a tank symbol. When you're firing at artillery, I believe it's just grenades that deal damage. Looking at some of the other symbols, if you roll a star, in most cases, that's not going to kill anything. That's used for some other types of rolls throughout the game. And if you roll a flag, that's a retreat symbol. For infantry, for each flag that you roll, it's going to cause them to retreat towards their starting table edge or towards their player's table edge by 1 hex space. So if you roll, for example, 3 flags, they have to retreat 3 hex spaces backwards towards their player's table edge. I don't think it says they have to go in the most convenient route, and it does say that they can ignore terrain penalties. For example, forests slow you down, towns slow you down when moving through them, except I believe when you're retreating, you ignore those penalties, so you just move right through them. If you were to retreat off of the board, or if you're in a position where you can't retreat because there are other units, friendly or enemy, surrounding your retreat path, and of course you're not allowed to move through other models or units, you actually have to remove 1 model from the unit for every retreat that you can't make. So you sort of chase them off the board, basically. So that's the battle phase. Pretty straightforward. You have your dice, you roll a number of dice based off of how far away your target is, you have to have line of sight, and then depending on what you roll and the type of unit that you're shooting at, you're going to remove models. There are also some additional functions. For example, if an infantry unit wipes out a unit in the adjacent hex, the infantry unit can move into that hex as sort of a free move. It's like a follow-up, take the ground action. Armor has a similar function where they can take the ground of an adjacent space if they clear all of the models out of that space, and then they actually get to shoot again. I'm not certain whether or not if they then clear out the next adjacent space, they get to move again and shoot again. That would be kind of intense if that's how it works, kind of a ripple waterfall effect. Haven't been able to make that happen yet, but maybe that is how it happens, and I'll have to look into it when the time comes. So that's the battle phase. And then you move on to sort of the final step, which is draw one card to replace the command card that you played at the beginning of this turn. You and your opponent, or opponents, are playing from the same command deck. So you're all drawing from the same deck, you're all discarding to the same discard pile. If you ever run out of cards in the command deck, you simply flip it over, shuffle it, and put it face down, and that becomes the new command deck. You go back and forth like that until one player has reached the number of medals that they require to win the game, and that's it. There's lots of other features that are built into the game, like how to sandbag walls work and how to barbed wire fences work. I'm not going to get into the details of all of those, but it's simple enough to say that they are very straightforward and easy to remember. The game actually comes with terrain cards that are basically little cheat sheet reminder cards that you can put next to the board so that all players can sort of look over at a glance and go, oh, that's right, I get cover because I'm in the forest. So instead of rolling 3 dice because you're adjacent to me, you're actually only going to roll 2 dice. There's also a card there that reminds you of the different firing patterns of the different types of units. Like I said, the infantry units fire at 3, 2, 1 as far as the dice numbers go, whereas artillery pieces fire at 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, meaning they can shoot a total of 6 spaces away, and every 2 spaces they go down 1 power, and of course tanks are unique as well in the armored units. There are also, and I haven't gotten to play with any of these, specialty forces throughout the game where you might play like an actual special unit that existed in a specific battle, like a spec force that they had for that fight. I don't know how those function. I'm guessing they just have some additional rules, but if it's anything like the rest of the game, it's not going to be too complicated. It's going to be pretty easy to follow. I've really enjoyed playing this. I can't really say this enough. The game takes everything that I like from all of the different game types that it represents, a tabletop, miniatures, war game, board game, and fits them perfectly together. I really don't have anything to nitpick about this game. The fact that it feels like a miniatures game, it feels historically accurate, it feels like I'm really fighting the battles that it's supposed to represent, and the whole thing is said and done, set up, played through, and broken down and put away within an hour. And you can learn it in 10, 15 minutes. It's really perfect. I'm very excited to continue to play through the different scenarios of this game. I want to get through all 16. I would love to get 8 people together and a second board and play the 4 versus 4 Operation Overlord. I think that would be so much fun. And one of the nice things about this game, and I'm sure I'll be looking into this in the future, is that there are numerous expansions for this game, including some that add planes, so you can have like dogfights going on and bomber runs going on over the battlefield while you're fighting on it. There are different areas of the world that you can fight in, such as Africa and the South Pacific, basically different places that World War II had famous battles for, all over Europe, things like that. So I can't really recommend this game enough. For $60, this is absolutely worth picking up, even if you only ever played each scenario once. I feel like you definitely get your money's worth out of this game, and I really can't think of a reason to do that, because you can play a scenario again just to swap sides, and then you can play it a third time just to try different tactics. I mean, you could probably play each scenario 4 or 5 times before you got bored of it, and then there's a total of 16 in the book, and then there's expansions, and then there's playing the same scenario again but with teams this time. There's all kinds of different things that you can do to keep this game entertaining, and I would really recommend that you pick it up and give it a try if you can. So, Memoir 44 by Days of Wonder, great game, absolutely worth picking up. The best of all worlds. It's a great board game, it's a great miniatures game, it's a great historical game, it's a great tactical game. Just give it a try, and I'm sure you'll like it. If you guys haven't yet, please go down below, like, comment, and subscribe. If you comment, I will try to get back to you as quickly as possible. I always do. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good night.